Today's pattern is an easy step-by-step tutorial on this easy macrame wall hanging. Hi friends, let's first go over some of the materials. You're going to need a 6-inch wooden dowel, some sharp scissors, as well as single strand cotton rope. It has to be single strand because we're going to comb out the fringe later on. But feel free to use any colors you like. I'm going to be using Winter Sage from Ropeshop.ca. Now, the next couple of items are optional, which is fabric glue or hot glue, as well as a macrame board and some T-pins. And as always, all the materials I use in this pattern will be linked in the description box below. Okay, let's get started. The first step is to attach all 10 60-inch cords onto our wooden dowel. To do this, fold your cord in half, and then with the loop end, you want to place that loop behind your wooden dowel. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach it using a lark's head knot. To do this, you want to place your long tail ends through your loop and pull taut. And there you have it. Now to tie 9 more. Alright, so we're going to work row by row. So for this first row, we're going to tie all square knots all the way across. Working with the first 4 cords, you want to take your leftmost cord and place it over top of the 2 middle. Then with the rightmost cord, you want to place that over top of the tail of your left, behind the 2 centers, and then through the loop of your left. Cinch up your slack to the top. Now this is only half of your square knot, so to complete the other half, you have to repeat the same thing but to the opposite side. So make a loop with your rightmost cord, and then with your leftmost cord, you want to place that over top of the tail, behind the 2 centers, around and through the loop of your right. And that, my friends, is how to tie a square knot. Now we're going to repeat the same thing with the next 4 strands of cord. And don't forget, if you find that I'm going too fast for you, you can always adjust the speed of this video by tapping the 3 dots on the top right corner. Or you can go ahead and check out my knot tutorial playlist. Alrighty, so like I said, for this first row, it's all square knots all the way across. You should have a total of 5 square knots when you're done this row. Okay, great. So for our second row, we're going to do another row of square knots, but this time we're going to alternate them. That way it'll connect our first row with our second row. And because we're alternating, we're going to be skipping our first 2 cords and our last 2 cords. I find it helpful to move them out of the way. Okay, so working with 4 strands of cord, 2 from the first knot and 2 from the second knot, we're going to tie another square knot, which will join those 2 knots together. This square knot is tied the same exact way that we did before, but you want to make sure that it sits right directly below your first row. We don't want to see any gaps between our rows. Alright, once this knot is complete, you want to grab the next set of 4 cords and tie another square knot. And we're going to work our way all the way across to the end of this row, leaving out the first 2 and the last 2 cords. You will have a total of 4 square knots in this row. Okay, those 2 cords on both ends, we're going to pull those back down because we're going to need them again for our third row. Alright, so for the third row, we're going to continue to alternate, which means we'll have 5 knots all the way across. But this row will only have 2 square knots at the start, 1 berry knot in the middle, followed by 2 more square knots. So for your first square knot, you want to grab the first 4 cords in this row and tie your square knot. And don't be concerned about this gap here, that is normal. When you alternate your square knots, it forms a lattice pattern, which means there will be a little bit of a gap on either ends of every other row. Alright, so for your next 4 cords, we're going to tie another square knot, And then after that, this is where the pattern gets interesting. Okay, with the next set of 4 cords, we're going to be tying a berry knot. I find it very helpful to push all the cords out of the way, that way nothing gets jumbled up. Because this isn't an ordinary berry knot, we're going to incorporate a new color. Grab one of your longer strands of 40-inch single strand rope in whatever color you choose. I'm using winter sage. Fold it in half to find the center. And then with that center, you want to place that behind all 4 of your middle cords. Now what we're going to do here is tie what I like to call a floating square knot. But don't worry, this knot is tied pretty much exactly the same way as a regular square knot. The only difference is that it's a separate piece tied on, which means it has the ability to slide up and down on our work. There is one minor trick though, you don't want to tie this knot too tight because you do want it to slide up and down easily. Alright, so a berry knot isn't just one knot, it's a series of knots. We already tied 1 square knot, we need 3 in total. So we need to stack 2 more square knots directly below this first one. Now I'm sure you've noticed that I'm not tying these knots directly below our previous row. And that is for a really good reason, and you'll see in just a little bit. So let's finish our third and final square knot here in our sinnet, and I will show you why this gap is important. Make sure you count 3 square knots in a row. And now what we're going to do is we're going to form our berry knot. So you want to make sure that there is a gap at the top here. Take your tail ends, just the white cords, and you want to thread that right through the top gap. And that is why we left a bit of a gap. So don't pull your cords all the way through just yet. What we want to do is slide all of our square knots at the top. Once it's snug and directly below our second row there, we're going to go ahead and pull all of our white cords so that it coils around onto itself. And don't be afraid to give it a few tugs just to make sure that it's sitting just right. Now this berry knot can slip out, so to secure it, what you want to do is tie 1 more square knot directly underneath it. And this square knot, you want it to be fairly snug. You don't want that berry knot going anywhere. Okay, so for your third row, at this point you should have 2 regular square knots, 1 berry knot, and then followed by 2 more regular square knots. Okay, so let's continue tying our last 2 square knots in this row. For row 4, we're going to continue to alternate, so we're going to leave out the first 2 and the last 2 cords. And then with the next 4 cords in this row, we're going to tie a regular square knot. Now for the second knot in this row, we're going to tie another berry knot. But you want to make sure that you have 2 cords from the second knot on your 4th row and 2 cords from your previous berry knot. But we are going to tie it just the same as we did for the very first berry knot. So grab another 40-inch strand of single strand cotton rope in the color of your choice. Fold it in half to find the center, and then place the center behind all 4 of your cords and begin to tie your 3 square knots. Remembering to leave a bit of a gap and also not tying your knots too tight because you want the ability to slide it up and down. Once you count all 3 square knots, you want to take your white tail ends and thread that through the top of your gap, slide up your square knots, and then go ahead and cinch up the slack, forming a berry knot. And don't forget to secure your berry knot by tying 1 more square knot directly underneath. Alright, so now that you've tied your second berry knot, we're going to tie a third, making sure to grab the other 2 cords from your previous berry knot in the third row, as well as 2 from the square knot next door. I'm going to go ahead and speed this up because I think you get the gist of it now. Okay, so to finish up the 4th row here, we're going to tie 1 more square knot, making sure to leave out the last 2 cords. Okay, so for our 5th row, it's going to be the same knot sequence as our 3rd row, which means 2 square knots, 1 berry knot, followed by 2 more regular square knots. And don't forget, we're always alternating, so we're going to start with the first 4 cords in this row. Before we continue on with our pattern here, at this point in the project, what I like to do is flip over my work and snip off all the green cords. I find that they really get in the way, so I go ahead and snip them off now. And you want to make sure that you leave about 1 inch of a tail left. You don't want to snip them too close to your work. Okay, so flip it back over and let's continue on. For rows 6 to 9, we're going to decrease in a V-shaped pattern. To do this, all we're going to do is leave out the first and last 2 cords of every row. So for row 6, you will have 4 square knots all the way across the entire row. For row 7, you should have a total of 3 square knots. For row 8, you will have a total of 2 square knots, and for row 9, you will have just 1. Okay, so row 10 is going to be a V shape, so let's divide our cords directly in half. We're going to start on the left-hand side and do a row of double half-hitch knots. So our very first cord on the left-hand side is going to be our filler cord, and we're going to tie all our knots around this cord. So to tie a double half-hitch knot, you want to grab the next cord and line and make a loop. Then with the tail end, you want to pull that through the loop and cinch to the top. This is only half of your knot, so to complete the other half, you want to repeat the same thing. Make a loop and then pull your tail end through that loop. Cinch it up to the top, and that is how you tie a double half-hitch knot. So we're going to repeat the same thing with the rest of our cords, working our way all the way down to the center of our V. Now, the double half-hitch knot has the bad reputation of being the most trickiest knot to master in macrame. So I have a few tips for you. Your filler cord really determines the shape of where your knots are going to lie. So really, your filler cord can guide any shape you like, whether it's curved or straight. And as you're tying your knots, you want to make sure that you're pulling it off to the side and slightly towards the back of your work. And making sure that you're not tying it too tight, otherwise it could buckle your filler cord. Okay, so now that we've done the first side, we're going to do the same thing, but to the opposite side. So grab the very last cord on your right. That is going to become your filler cord, so drag it all the way across. And start tying your double half hitches around that cord. Remember, you want your knots to wrap around your filler cord, so if you pull it too tight, it will cause it to buckle, which would make your row not so straight. Most of the issues with double half hitch knots all boil down to tension. You always want to hold your filler cord taut, but you want to tie your knots with an even tension. Anyways, that is my whole spiel on double half hitch knots, and remember, practice always makes perfect. Okay, so once you reach the end, you want to cross your 2 filler cords and tie 1 more double half hitch knot, joining them together. Okay, time to get out your 20 strands of 30-inch single strand cotton rope in your color of choice, and we are going to tie raya knots. You will need 2 cords together for this. Fold in half to find the center. Then place that center on the first 2 cords on your left. Once you have it placed on top of your 2 cords, what you want to do is take the tail ends and wrap it behind and through the center of your 2 cords. Once you have a good grip on those, what you want to do is slide that all the way up to the top, just below your row of double half hitch knots. Then lie your tail ends across your project so it's up and out of the way. And then we're going to repeat the same thing. Grab another set of 2 cords, place it on top, and then wrap it around and through the center, and then slide it all the way up to the top, just below your double half hitch knots. Now, raya knots are more commonly used in weaving, so they're tied on here a little bit differently than how it would be done if you're using a loom. When working on a loom, you start from the bottom and work your way up to the top of your project, whereas with macrame, you're starting at the top and working your way down. So because of that, our raya knots are flipped up temporarily so that we can work on our final row. So for our bottom row here, it's going to be another row of double half hitch knots. And these double half hitch knots will secure our raya knots so that they don't slip off. Making sure that your rope is divided in half, we're going to go ahead and tie our double half hitch knots all the way down on the left hand side. And then of course repeat the same thing on the other side of row 12 as well. And finish off row 12 with another double half hitch knot, joining your 2 filler cords together. Okay, so at this point, I like to bring down my green cords and I like to pull on each one, tightening up my raya knots. Once you're satisfied with how they look, what we're going to do next is flip over our wall hanging and clean up the mess on the back. Now, this part is optional, but I do feel better securing it down with a little bit of hot glue. That way I know that my ends won't unravel over time. Now you can keep your white cords, however, I want mine to be hidden. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip off my white cords, leaving about an inch. And you do want to leave a good inch because what we're going to do is we're going to flip it up and tack it onto the back. Again, it's totally optional. You can leave your white cords there if you like a layered look. But I want my fringe to be all green at the bottom, so I am going to go ahead and tack it with some hot glue. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do our first initial trim. This trim is not meant to be perfect, we're just getting rid of some of the length so that it'll help us comb out our fringe. Now you might have a little bit of a gap here, and I have a trick to fix that, which is more hot glue. Sometimes your fringe is fluffy enough that you won't have a gap. However, if you do find that you have a gap and it bothers you like it does me, then you can always hit it up with a little bit of hot glue and none's the wiser. So once that problem's solved, we can go ahead and do the final sharp edge cut. If you happen to make this easy macrame wall hanging, please tag me on Instagram. I would seriously love to see it. And I'll give you a shout out on my story highlight reel. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and I'll see you in the next one.